have been listening to live Supreme Court arguments over the authority to impose tariffs, whether President Trump has that, to impose sweeping tariffs without Congress's approval. Now, what he has been using is a national emergency law to do so. It's the linchpin of his economic agenda, these tariffs. Now, based on what we've heard, the outlook doesn't seem to be all that great for the president, who earlier this morning called these arguments and the forthcoming decision that they will make in the Supreme Court life or death. We're going to talk about what we've heard so far with an incredible panel here. Steve Vladeck, I want to start with you. What is your take on this? And again, I know we're kind of in the weeds on tariffs, but I just want to remind our viewers that this is about so much more. This is about presidential power and whether Donald Trump has as much as he thinks he does.
Dan, it's such an important moment for the court and the country. We've had so many rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court in Trump cases over the last 9 months, but they've all been in this frenetic context.
Okay, so Trump's financial empire just got hit with what legal experts are calling the most aggressive court action ever taken against a sitting or former president's business interests, because a New York judge issued a nationwide asset freeze on November 23rd, 2025, that locks down everything Trump owns. And I mean everything from Trump Tower to Mar-a-Lago to golf courses to bank accounts to stocks to jewelry to family-linked properties. All of it frozen because Trump failed to post the required $450 million bond for his civil fraud appeal. This is absolutely devastating, you guys. We're not talking about some limited restraining order on specific assets. We're talking about a comprehensive freeze that prevents Trump from transferring, selling, mortgaging, or in any way moving any asset without explicit court approval, which means Trump's entire business operation is essentially paralyzed, and Trump personally can't access his own wealth to pay for legal fees, to fund his campaign, to pay business debts, or to do anything else that requires money. Come on, are you kidding me right now? The President of the United States just had his financial empire locked down by a judge because he couldn't come up with the bond money to appeal his fraud conviction. And court documents are exposing that Trump has been hiding wealth in offshore accounts and shell companies, specifically to avoid having to pay the judgments against him. This is the nightmare scenario that Trump has been fighting to prevent ever since that New York civil fraud trial resulted in a $355 million penalty that's now grown to over $450 million with interest. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Huge political or economic significance, you got to go through Congress because we got these different branches of government that are all co-equal. What Trump is essentially saying is, I have an emergency. It's called a trade deficit. And as a result of that, I need to take action that makes me go around Congress. Well, the other side saying, that's not the emergency. You still got to go through Congress to do so. That's why you're hearing things about delegation. Has Congress given the power of the purse and taxation and leveraging tariffs back to you in some way? They're saying no.
The scope of this asset freeze is truly unprecedented because it covers literally everything that Trump owns or has any interest in, and it extends to preventing Trump from transferring assets to family members or to shell companies or to offshore accounts. All the usual tricks that wealthy people use to hide assets from judgments are explicitly prohibited. According to the YouTube transcript from Pump Politics dated November 23, 2025, the freeze covers real estate holdings including Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, Trump's golf courses, all bank accounts, both domestic and offshore, stock holdings, business interests in the Trump organization, personal property including jewelry and art, and even properties held by family members that investigators believe Trump actually controls. The judge's order specifically states that nothing can be transferred without prior court approval, which means that if Trump wants to pay his staff or pay debts or access money for any purpose, he has to go to court first. That's an extraordinary level of judicial control over someone's finances, and it shows just how concerned the judge is that Trump is going to hide assets if he's not restrained. The $450 million bond requirement that Trump failed to meet tells you everything about his actual financial situation versus what he's been claiming. Trump has spent decades boasting about being a billionaire worth anywhere from $3 to $10 billion. But when a court required him to put up $450 million to appeal his fraud conviction, Trump apparently couldn't do it. That failure suggests either that Trump doesn't actually have the wealth he claims, or that his wealth is tied up in a liquid real estate he can't quickly convert to cash, or that he's hidden his wealth so successfully that he can't access it without exposing the hiding schemes. Any explanation is politically devastating. If Trump isn't actually wealthy, that destroys his political brand. If his wealth is over-leveraged real estate, his empire is a house of cards. And if he's hidden assets, that's potentially criminal conduct on top of the civil fraud he's already been convicted of. The hidden offshore accounts and shell companies that court documents exposed suggest Trump has been systematically trying to move assets beyond the reach of American courts. The judge's order explicitly references concerns that, without a freeze, assets will disappear offshore or be transferred to family members, which means the court has evidence Trump was actively planning such transfers. Moving assets offshore to avoid judgments is a classic tactic of wealthy defendants who know they're going to lose. You set up companies in jurisdictions with banking secrecy laws, transfer asset ownership to offshore entities, create layers of shell companies obscuring ownership, and then claim you're broke when courts order payment. If Trump has been doing this, and the judge's language strongly suggests he has, that could be criminal fraud or contempt of court. The impact on Trump Organization daily operations is immediate and crippling because the freeze means Trump Org can't pay staff salaries, can't pay rent or mortgages, can't pay vendors, can't pay utilities, can't do anything involving spending money without court permission. Imagine trying to run hotels and golf courses when you need a judge's approval to pay the electric bill. That process might take weeks and requires Trump to disclose business information to the court. The administrative burden makes efficient operations impossible and exposes Trump's financial information in ways that could reveal other problems. Staff will quit when they don't get paid. Vendors will stop providing services. Properties will fall into disrepair. All of that creates a downward spiral where businesses become less valuable, making it even harder for Trump to satisfy judgments. Trump's legal team filing emergency motions to lift the freeze shows how desperate the situation is. But the judge denied those motions, showing the court isn't sympathetic to arguments that the freeze is too harsh. Trump's lawyers presumably argued the freeze violates due process, causes irreparable harm, prevents earning income to pay judgments. But judges have broad discretion to impose freezes when defendants are likely to hide assets, and this judge was convinced Trump poses exactly that risk. The denial means Trump is stuck with this freeze at least until a full hearing, which could take weeks or months. During that time, Trump's financial empire is on life support, bleeding value every day. The threat of liquidation of iconic properties like Mar-a-Lago is Trump's ultimate nightmare because losing Mar-a-Lago would be financially devastating and personally humiliating. Mar-a-Lago isn't just property to Trump, it's his home, his private club, the symbol of his success. Losing it would destroy Trump psychologically, in addition to costing hundreds of millions. Same with Trump Tower, his signature Manhattan property, where his name is literally on the building. If courts liquidate Trump's properties to collect the $450 million plus judgment, they'll go after the most valuable properties first. Trump faces seeing his entire real estate empire dismantled piece by piece, and the freeze is the first step. You freeze assets so they can't be moved, then liquidate systematically until the judgment is satisfied. The connection to Trump's prior $355 million fraud penalty provides crucial context, because that penalty has been growing with interest while Trump appeals, which is how it reached $450 million. Trump was found liable for systematically inflating property values on financial statements to get better loans and inflate his net worth. Judge Arthur Engeron issued that $355 million penalty plus banning Trump and his sons from running New York businesses. Trump's been appealing, but New York law requires defendants to post bond for the full judgment amount to appeal. Trump's failure to post bond means the judgment becomes immediately collectible, which is why the freeze is critical. The court wants assets available when appeals are exhausted. The historical nature of this freeze against a sitting president is unprecedented in American history. Presidents have faced legal issues before, but never has a president's entire financial empire been locked down this way. Even Nixon didn't have assets frozen during Watergate. This shows both how serious the legal issues are and how little deference courts are giving Trump's presidential status. Judges are treating Trump like any other wealthy defendant trying to hide assets. That lack of deference is exactly what Trump complains about, claiming persecution and unfair treatment. But judges are just enforcing law the way they would against anyone who failed to post a required bond and showed evidence of hiding assets. Now let's dig into the legal mechanisms and financial implications, because understanding how these orders work explains why this is so devastating. Asset freezes in civil cases are governed by state court rules giving judges authority to prevent defendants from dissipating assets while litigation is pending. The legal standard typically requires showing the defendant will likely hide, transfer, or waste assets if not restrained, and that without a freeze, the plaintiff can't collect judgments. In Trump's case, evidence came from discovery of undisclosed offshore accounts, shell companies designed to hide ownership, Trump's history of using complex corporate structures to avoid creditors, and probably testimony from people who know Trump's financial dealings. Once the judge concluded Trump posed a flight risk with assets, legal authority for the freeze was clear, and Trump's emergency motions were doomed. The mechanics of how the freeze affects daily operations are brutal. Trump can't do anything with any asset without court permission, and getting permission requires filing motions, providing documentation, having hearings, and going through bureaucratic processes requiring disclosure Trump doesn't want to make. So if Trump Organization needs to pay $50,000 to a vendor, they have to file a court motion explaining why, provide documentation, get vendor information, have a hearing where the judge evaluates the request, then finally get an order permitting that specific payment. That might take weeks and requires disclosing business information Trump prefers keeping private. Trump has to repeat this for every payment, every transaction, every operation involving money. The administrative burden and lack of privacy make efficient business operations impossible and expose Trump's finances to court scrutiny that could reveal other problems. The offshore accounts and shell companies exposed in court documents are classic asset protection techniques that wealthy people use to make assets judgment-proof, but they cross into illegal conduct depending on how they're structured and whether they're disclosed properly. Having offshore accounts isn't automatically illegal. Lots of wealthy people have foreign accounts for legitimate reasons, but hiding them from courts, creditors, or tax authorities becomes illegal. Shell companies similarly aren't automatically problematic, but using them to hide ownership specifically to defraud creditors or avoid judgments is illegal. The fact that Trump apparently had undisclosed offshore accounts and shell companies until court investigators uncovered them strongly suggests improper purposes. That exposure creates both legal problems, potential criminal charges for fraud or contempt, and political problems confirming the narrative that Trump is a tax cheat who hides money. The $450 million bond amount is significant because bond requirements serve specific purposes in appeals. When you lose a civil case and want to appeal, posting bond ensures money is available to pay the judgment if you lose the appeal without the plaintiff going through additional collection proceedings. Bonds protect plaintiffs during years of appeals and discourage frivolous appeals by requiring defendants to put up real money. In Trump's case, the requirement apparently exceeded his ability or willingness to post that amount, showing Trump is either much less wealthy than he claims, or his assets are structured in ways making liquid bonds difficult. Bond companies typically require collateral worth 110 to 120% of face value and want liquid assets like cash or stocks rather than illiquid real estate. If Trump couldn't find a bond company willing to take his real estate as collateral, that suggests bond companies evaluated his properties and concluded they weren't worth enough to secure $450 million, meaning Trump's properties are worth less than he claims. The political implications of Trump not posting bond are enormous because it destroys his image as a billionaire businessman who can self-fund campaigns. Trump has spent years bragging about wealth as evidence he's smarter and more successful than critics. But now it's exposed that Trump couldn't come up with $450 million for bond, which is pocket change for actual billionaires worth $3 billion plus. Real billionaires like Musk or Bezos could write a personal check for $450 million and barely notice. Trump's failure means either he's not actually a billionaire, or his net worth is almost entirely over-leveraged real estate that banks won't lend against because they know it's not worth Trump's claims. Either way, Trump has been lying about wealth for years, and this bond failure proves it. The impact on Trump's campaign funding is particularly important because Trump needs enormous money for presidential campaigns, ads, staff, venues, all modern campaign operations. Trump claimed he could self-fund if needed, making him less dependent on donors and more independent to say whatever he wants. But the asset freeze makes self-funding impossible because Trump can't access money without court permission, and judges won't approve using frozen assets for political campaigns when they're supposed to satisfy fraud judgments. So Trump is now entirely dependent on outside donors, and donors will ask hard questions about Trump's finances before writing big checks. The freeze weakens Trump politically by making him dependent on others for campaign funding and raising questions about his business competence and honesty about wealth. The threat to legal defense funding is even more immediate because Trump faces multiple criminal and civil cases requiring expensive lawyers, and frozen assets means Trump can't easily pay legal bills. Trump has been fundraising from supporters claiming persecution and asking small-dollar donors for legal defense funds, but those contributions are nowhere near enough to cover tens of millions in legal fees. If Trump can't access business assets to pay, lawyers and donors aren't contributing enough, Trump might end up with lawyers withdrawing or accepting court-appointed counsel in criminal cases. That would be humiliating for someone bragging about having the best lawyers. The freeze creates a situation where Trump's legal defenses crumble because he can't fund them, making adverse judgments and potentially criminal convictions more likely. The liquidation process, if appeals fail, would involve court-supervised auctions of Trump properties, where highest bidders buy iconic Trump assets at potentially bargain prices. Court-ordered liquidations typically don't achieve best prices because there's pressure to sell quickly. Publicity about why properties are being sold depresses buyer interest, and courts are primarily concerned with raising money to satisfy judgments rather than maximizing value. Trump could see Mar-a-Lago sold for significantly less than normal market value, with no control over who buys it or what they do after purchase. The psychological impact of seeing properties auctioned and his name removed from buildings would be devastating because Trump's identity is wrapped up in his real estate empire and the Trump brand. The political impact would be equally devastating, exposing Trump as a failure whose empire collapsed under legal scrutiny. So what does this asset freeze mean for Trump's presidency, for his political operation, and for his long-term financial viability? The most immediate impact is that Trump's ability to fund legal defenses and political campaigns has been crippled just when he needs money most. We're heading into the 2026 midterm cycle where Trump needs to support Republican candidates and build resources for potential 2028 activities. But Trump can't self-fund any of that because assets are frozen, making him entirely dependent on donors and Republican Party fundraising infrastructure. That dependence gives donors leverage over Trump they didn't have before. If Trump says or does things donors don't like, they can threaten to withhold funding, and Trump has no choice but to moderate or risk running out of money. The political implications of Trump losing financial independence are huge because it makes him controllable in ways he wasn't when he could credibly claim he didn't need anyone's money. The polling, showing 55% of Americans believe Trump is hiding wealth, creates a political narrative Democrats will exploit relentlessly in 2026 campaigns. Democrats will run ads saying Trump is a crook who hides money offshore to avoid paying what he owes. Trump is a fraud who lies about wealth. Trump can't even come up with bond money, proving he's not the successful businessman he pretends to be. These attacks will resonate across the political spectrum because nobody likes rich people who cheat and use wealth to avoid consequences ordinary people face. Even Trump supporters who don't care about his policy positions might be turned off by evidence Trump is a tax cheat and financial fraud who's been lying about his success. The asset freeze provides concrete evidence, making these attacks much more effective than general allegations without proof. The GOP donor hesitation resulting from Trump's financial problems will make it much harder for Republicans to compete in expensive 2026 races. Big donors want to support winners and want their money used effectively. If donors conclude Trump is a financial mess, consumed by legal problems, who might not survive politically until 2026, they'll redirect donations to other candidates rather than throwing good money after bad. Republican candidates in competitive districts face tough choices about whether to embrace Trump or distance themselves. Embracing Trump might help base turnout but hurts fundraising if donors don't want to support Trump-aligned candidates, while distancing helps fundraising but potentially hurts base enthusiasm. The freeze creates a cascade of problems for Republicans extending far beyond Trump's personal finances. The base erosion risk is real because Trump's working-class supporters believe Trump's story that he was a self-made billionaire who built a real estate empire through hard work and smart deals. And that narrative is falling apart as it becomes clear Trump isn't as wealthy as claimed and has been using fraud to inflate success. Some supporters will double down claiming the freeze is political persecution, but others will start questioning whether they've been conned by someone whose business success was largely media creation rather than real substance. Once those doubts spread among Trump's base, it becomes very hard to restore confidence because Trump's entire political brand is built on supposed business competence. if Trump isn't actually a successful businessman, if he's actually a failed businessman whose properties are about to be auctioned to pay fraud judgments, then what's left of his appeal beyond divisive rhetoric and cultural grievance? The connection to all Trump's other crises creates overwhelming sense that his presidency is collapsing under simultaneous disasters. You've got the asset freeze crippling finances. You've got Judge Boasberg ordering Trump to court personally. You've got Republicans revolting on House floor votes. You've got protests demanding his arrest. You've got Epstein documents being unsealed. You've got devastating economic numbers. You've got Canada mobilizing troops. You've got his disastrous press conference. You've got Kristi Noem walking out of hearings. Every single story shows Trump failing or facing accountability or losing control. And the cumulative effect is that voters and even supporters are starting to see Trump as a loser who's been exposed rather than as a winner being persecuted. Once that perception takes hold, it's very difficult to recover because politics is about perception and whether people view you as strong or weak. The cash crunch hitting Trump's deportation and firing agendas is significant because Trump's signature priorities require enormous funding to implement. And frozen assets means funding is harder to secure. Mass deportation operations require paying for detention facilities, transportation, ICE personnel, legal proceedings. The FBI purge and broader government restructuring require paying severance for fired workers, transition costs, new hiring. While some money comes from government appropriations, Trump has been supplementing with his own funds and political organization funds. If those funds are frozen, Trump's policy priorities stall because there's not enough money to implement them at the scale Trump envisions. That stalling creates political problems because supporters expect delivery on campaign promises, and if he can't deliver because he's run out of money, they'll be disappointed and angry. The admin-wide turmoil with cash crunch, combining with trade war costs and congressional hearing chaos, creates an impression of complete dysfunction and inability to govern effectively. Voters are watching cabinet officials walk out of hearings, Trump getting assets frozen by courts, Republicans revolting in Congress, Trump provoking military tensions with Canada, Trump's press conferences turning into rambling disasters. The collective message from all these incidents is that Trump and his team don't know what they're doing, they're not prepared for governing responsibilities, and they're making America weaker and more chaotic. That message is exactly what Democrats need for 2026. They don't even have to make the case themselves. Trump is making it through his own visible failures. The historic nature of a sitting president having assets frozen will be studied in law schools and political science classes for decades, as an example of how far Trump's legal problems extended beyond normal presidential accountability. Future candidates will be asked about Trump's asset freeze and whether they would have handled things differently. Future presidents will face stricter scrutiny of financial arrangements because Trump's example showed how presidents can use business empires to hide assets and enrich themselves while in office. The Trump asset freeze becomes a watershed moment, changing how we think about presidential accountability and whether business conflicts of interest are compatible with holding the presidency. None of that is good for Trump's legacy or his family's future prospects in business or politics. So where does this leave us after a New York judge froze all Trump's assets nationwide on November 23, 2025, because Trump failed to post a $450 million bond? We've got Trump's entire financial empire locked down and paralyzed with nothing transferable without court approval. We've got exposure of hidden offshore accounts and shell companies Trump used to hide wealth. We've got Trump unable to fund legal defenses or campaigns without donor support. We've got proof Trump isn't as wealthy as he claims because he couldn't post bond money a real billionaire could easily cover. We've got threats of liquidation of iconic properties like Mar-a-Lago if appeals fail. We've got polling showing majorities believe Trump is hiding wealth, creating perfect Democratic attack material. We've got GOP donors hesitating to support Trump because his financial situation is a mess. We've got policy agendas stalled because of cash crunches. And we've got one more massive crisis added to the pile overwhelming Trump's presidency and making him look weak, corrupt, and incompetent. This asset freeze isn't just a legal problem. It's a political catastrophe that exposes Trump's lies about wealth and cripples his ability to operate financially just when he needs money most to defend against legal challenges and fund political operations heading into devastating 2026 midterms.